Hello everybody and welcome to the TopCoder webinar series. Thank you all for joining us for today's discussion. As you can see by the kind of spooky graphic on your screen there, today's topic is security, protecting intellectual property and open innovation and crowdsourcing. And we're very excited to bring this information to you. In a few moments I'll be introducing to you Mike Morris, TopCoder SVP, Senior Vice President, and he's the gentleman who will be driving the majority of this presentation. And for those who want to know, speaking right now, I'm Clinton Bonner, Marketing Manager at TopCoder, and also your humble co-host for today's event.
Thanks, Clinton. So the first thing I think is, why this topic? And it's a really important topic to talk about. And we find that no matter who we're talking with, whether our clients or prospective clients, they could be in the healthcare space, technology, pharmaceutical, government, defense, manufacturing, retail. This topic always comes up. It's one of the first things that people ask. And where we're going with it is, the fact is that models like TopCoder are the future. I mean, that is, being seen today. People are getting an extensive amount of value from open innovation models. And the good news, and what we want to really go through today, is that there are ways to protect clients. First off on this, I am not a lawyer. But I do know there are, technically a lot of different types of intellectual property. Intellectual property in general is going to include information that clients consider to be confidential, information and assets that they want to protect, and information that they want to be protected from. So in a lot of cases, other people's private information.
How do you handle IP protection and infringement from a broad stroke sense?
Okay, great. So there really are two questions at play when you're talking about an open innovation setting. First is, how do you protect that confidential information, the client's secret sauce everybody's concerned about. And the second is, how do you protect them from other people's, right, as we were saying a little earlier. The confidential information is often what ends up giving a company its competitive advantage. That's why it's so important. And because of this, there are laws in place to protect IP. The risks involved are often what prevent a company from engaging in an open innovation setting, and therefore they don't end up getting the benefits that can come from working with an open innovation company, a company like TopCoder. So what I want to talk about a little bit in addressing this are the three kind of core areas I see in terms of how you go about protecting yourself. And one is contracts, obviously. So contracts between companies and individuals, those have to be in place. The second main area is processes. So, specifically employing processes to mitigate the risk and control any sort of exposure you may have within intellectual property concerns. And the final one is obviously the audience that you're sharing with. So who are you working with? Who's working for you? Who are you sharing information with? All those questions need to be understood at a very granular level. So we have multiple levels of contracts to address information that is highly sensitive to the things that are less sensitive. It's a very important part of the engagement process with a community member, and we treat it very seriously. From a process perspective, this is really where we put a lot of focus. There are very specific processes at TopCoder on how we engage our community. And one of the main pieces of that is how we break work down. So TopCoder is all about taking complex problems, larger solutions, breaking them down into finite pieces of work, and having those finite pieces of work go out to the community. It gives you much more control over what you're doing with the community than if you did not break it down. The other last part of our process that's really important from our perspective is we're very, very rigorous about reviews. So people that are not familiar with our process may think that a coder could just find something on the internet and submit it as their own inside of a contest. That's really not really practical. It would be very evident to our review process, and it would stick out like a sore thumb if that were to happen. And that all goes back to very specifically asking for what we want the community to do, and then very detailed review of what they do in return. And the real key here is you need to be able to qualify the pool that you're working with. And I'll talk a little bit about that further on in this presentation, but that's something that you just need to understand, that in open innovation platform, there is a degree of qualification required for a community member to work on somebody's product.
How do you know it's the person's original work, that they're actually doing it and they're submitting it and it's theirs, and therefore when the transfer takes place, it can be solely the company that's getting the work done?
It really does come down, again, to that strong process that's put in place and the ability to police the exchange of intellectual property. For example, at TopCoder, when we do go through review of a piece of software, we have extremely specific questions. They check for things like, is there any sort of sign or any sort of example of extraneous code within the software submission. We also require, for instance, if in some cases a piece of third-party work may be allowed to be submitted, so for instance an image or a piece of artwork, which in most cases they're not, but if they were, we have very stringent requirements on knowing and seeing and getting that original source. So we know that came from, where it came from and how it was produced. And again, it does go back to, I know I stressed this in the last time, but splitting things down into small discrete pieces is a big advantage to our process and our ability to enforce the controls that we need to keep our customers safeguarded.
You know, we're working with a virtual workforce, a global community. So how do you know the worker behind a certain monitor is who he or she says they are, and why is that important?
Okay, sure. So when it comes to open innovation and TopCoder, I am going to answer this question, but you do really need to take a step back for a second and think a little bit differently. This is important for everybody out there listening. Of course, it is important that you know who the person is, but what you're looking for in an open innovation contest really is about the deliverable. Okay? What we're judging at the end of the day is the deliverable and not the person. We're not going out and asking a person to sign up for something and then give them a task to do. We're asking them to do the deliverables, and then we judge them and pick the right one, pick the best one. So, of course, I don't want to underscore the fact that it is important that you know who is completing these deliverables, but not to lose sight of the fact that you are focusing on the deliverable and not just the person. So some of the things that we do, for example, are we know the following information. We have this on file before anybody is allowed to compete in a TopCoder contest. We have their registration information. We have all their demographic information, everything that they sign up for. If you on the phone have been through the TopCoder registration process, and particularly on the side of going down as a competitor, it's long. There's a lot of information we gather. The second thing, and a very important part of it, is we have all their payment information. This is fairly complex. We work in, for the most part, every country around the globe, and that we're allowed to work with, and we have payment information on file with competitors in those countries. The final one is for things that are confidential, that have the contests that are marked as confidential contests. Those do have a qualified pool of resources where we have their government IDs on file and a little more paperwork on file, allowing them to get into that pool. It's also important that we have experience with the community. So this is something that a lot of people don't really, I don't think they really appreciate from an open innovation setting, and they really need to, in particular in our model, understand this part. So when somebody participates in software contests with TopCoder, we get a lot of information. We track a lot of detail. And that work is not trivial. We have identified that it takes between 6 to 9 months on average to effectively onboard a competitor to a point where he's actually producing intellectual property that gets transferred to our clients so that he wins a competition, in other words. Through that process, we get to know a lot about these people in terms of the work that they're doing, in terms of the information we gather from them, in terms of the quality of their deliverables, in terms of the communication we have with them electronically.
What controls do we have in place, or should they be listening for to have in place to protect confidentiality?
Okay. An example of this, and showing why this is important, is one of our client success stories. So 2 years ago, we engaged with a large telecommunications client, and they asked us to work on a set of projects that would impact some of their partners and vendors eventually. It really needed to be kept confidential. It has since been announced, but during the time before it was announced, we did this by using a qualified private pool of people that were cleared to participate in those competitions. We obviously went back to what I said at the beginning. We broke those projects down into very small pieces, and we were able to pick out the pieces that needed to be put under the protected process and really safeguarded that way. And we were able to anonymize the whole thing. We were able to kind of take out the main confidential areas and anonymize the entire set of projects. This did go underneath. We have this thing called a CCA competition, which means that members have to agree to an additional confidentiality agreement. This did also put in an extra layer of protection above the processes that we put in place. The result was that we worked in these systems for 2 years, and before they were announced, and everything went seamlessly. We have the ability, in this particular case, there was a very complicated set of projects, and we needed to break them down into those pieces, as I said, but we did need the community to do that because it wasn't a trivial task. So we used what's called in the TopCoder process as a co-pilot. Co-pilots are people that help us manage streams of work. And those co-pilots in this particular case went under agreement specifically with our client, and this kind of created what we would look at as a private pool. So people that were under contract with our client, and at the end of the day, they essentially had all the same agreements in place that a typical contractor would go through. This isn't something we do on a really wide array of work, but in this particular case, we did need those people to help break down the projects into those anonymous pieces.
Right. And I think the important thing there too is when we had to, the ability, because of the maturity of the model, when we had to do that fashion, it was kind of interchangeable. It was doable because the knowledge was there to do it. So again, when you're going through your journey and understanding open innovation, think about those complex things that might arise, because that's going to determine how much ultimately you can do to drive your strategic vision through an open innovation platform. So, getting onto this one, every single time, people are concerned about their competitors, right? They want to know, what can they see? Can they come in and take IP from us? Can they come steal an idea? How do you handle competitors? What's your take on this? So I'll again toss it back to Mike, but this one comes up every single time we're chatting. People are worried about the competitors. We understand why, but we do have some good answers to share here.
So what I often hear in this particular concern is hey Mike, I really want the developers that have worked on these type of systems before. Right? Those are the people I want to compete. But in the same breath, they will say, however, I don't want them ever to work on systems like this again. Right? So, I mean, it's one of those things where you do have to be a little realistic about that. I think it's somewhat unreasonable to have that type of request, but it is reality, and that's what people ask for. We think the key to that, as a business, you should have the choice of who you open up your work to. This is key. For example, at TopCoder, we can restrict the community base based on the company that they've worked for, based on the company that they previously worked for, based on industry. We have a lot of ability to put questions inside of our process before somebody's allowed to work in a competition to qualify them even further. It comes down to a question of risk versus reward. And what do you want to let your competitors know that you're doing? Do you even want to let them compete on your competitions? The key is that you should have the choice of whether or not you want to let it open to that group of people or not. We provide that choice. Now, take a little bit different, again, look at it from the open innovation cap for a second, so everybody on the phone, think of it this differently. You may not want the people that have this experience. And there's been research done on TopCoder by Karim Lakhani, who is a professor at Harvard Business School, and he wrote a paper about this. And one of the results of the paper was saying that the broader profile of person you have competing gives you potentially the better chances of getting an extreme outcome, an incredibly innovative outcome. Because people are going to approach those problems with completely different set of experiences than what a person that just did it would. So this is really something to think about. And it is another part of open innovation that sometimes gets overlooked. When you open up things past your four walls, you get a very diverse set of skill sets, backgrounds, experiences, and that can be powerful if used correctly.
One thing I do want to address here and ask you to share with the audience is, what typically happens from a contest and a competition standpoint when you start to put in these layers of restrictions and you start to determine, you start making that pool, that available pool of competitors smaller? What are some of the trade-offs there?
Yeah, so on some of those one-off contests that have been out there, it's pretty simple. It either is open or it's not open. It does get a little more complicated when you get into larger systems with potentially consecutive contests that run together. So you do have to be conscious of how you qualify or as you said, filter the pool. So the key is that as you limit the number of potential competitors, you could be limiting the potential results. So you need to keep that in consideration. That's why, again, it goes back to having the choice. Which ones need to be protected, and maybe those need a little bit more prize money on them to drive the participation up, than one that's completely open. The key with our platform is we've been doing this long enough that we've built all the pieces around that. We know when a contest doesn't have the right number of competitors to it. We know when you have to increase the prize money by $50 to drive more participation in. We have all those pieces built into our platform, and they're things that we learned over the last 11 years and things that we've ended up automating in the last few years.
How can a community work inside an established, something that's a pre-existing secured environment? How does that work? Because again, for some people in the audience, this might be the majority of what they need to have happen, and if there's not a good solution for it, well then maybe open innovation isn't a good solution. Or what's the answer we would provide here? This
comes up a lot, and particularly in engagements that get more integrated. So as clients are working with an open innovation platform longer, the issue becomes more and more relevant. And most large companies I've found have put processes in place to handle things like offshore developers, contract resources, and making sure that they have all those processes behind those engagements. But typically, not community resources, not an open innovation platform. They haven't thought about that. They haven't put those processes in place for the most part. In general, I think people feel more comfortable opening their systems and their data up to random people that work for a company. But I don't know that they should. Just because someone has a company tied to their name tag doesn't speak to the individual profile or the work that they're creating, most importantly. The result is that I think it is possible that when you have those processes in place, you may let your guard down on some of the individuals that could be coming through the door there. In a community model, you really do care about that individual. You care about their profile. You care about the work that they've completed, and most importantly, you care about the assets that they're creating for you now, or they're going to create for you. So it is just a different way to look at how you're engaging with a person. As a general rule, in TopCoder, we do not share data or provide access to clients' environments with our community. We do our best to have simulated data. We use cloud-based environments. We're very mature in our use of clouds and how to provision them and distribute them for our community to work on our customers' projects. And I do have an example about this. We do have a client that's in a highly regulated space. I'll leave it at that. And we have a set of processes in place internally at that client, so their processes, to make sure that they're preventing any sort of secure data from leaving their DMZ. In addition, we put up another process within TopCoder to ensure that if it were to come through, we will have a process to make sure that we catch it before it gets out to the community. Lastly, we also have a set of protected competitors that, again, back to that qualified pool that I mentioned before, that have signed agreements, obviously with TopCoder, also with some of our clients, and they're helping to police it even at a larger extent, so at a further extent. So we treat this extremely seriously, and we're not open to just having, in this particular case, we're not opening to having just one process safeguarded. We have essentially 3 processes. Many times,
again, not to be a broken record, but many times people are asking about how to get things done when certain aspects of the whole just cannot be shared. Like there's a great divide there, and people just don't understand how they're possibly going to get the entire project done if certain things just cannot leave internally for whatever security governances are in place.
What this comes down to, really what you're asking is, it's a productivity and capacity issue. If you can't open things up, you cannot take the benefit of the capacity that you have ready or the productivity gains that you could get by using a community. So the question is, how much of your work can you use an on-demand community for? Can you, as a company, parse out the pieces that need to be protected? There are going to be certain things that you may want to keep internal, period. That's just how it is. Typically, I think companies should invert the percentage that they protect versus open up, but that's obviously my point of view, to help them maximize what they can get from open innovation. And I think as this area continues to mature, that will continue to happen. But a lot of this comes down to the how advanced, how mature is the internal organization at that client, and how mature, how advanced is the open innovation platform that they're using. Can you take a large project and split it up? Can you decide what needs to stay internal? What needs to be protected? What doesn't? What's in the middle? Can you put those processes in place in a way that you can effectively and repeatedly do that for projects one after another? Effectively doing this will allow you to leverage the benefits of parallelization, which is a key benefit of open innovation.
And a tough word.
A very tough word to say. Not doing this will mean probably that the entire project would need to stay within the 4 walls and subject to the traditional labor constraints. At TopCoder, we have built this model. This is what we built from day one. It was always about how to parallelize the work that we're doing. It comes down to the atomization of work to a point where you can maximize the efficiency.
Even with different processes and different things in place, right, for protections, we're always still asked, oh, well, what else? Like, what else should I know? What risks are there that kind of still persist and still exist?
So we talked about a lot today. You guys are probably a little tired of hearing about all those processes we have in place and everything we do. At the end of the day, we are still working with people. And no matter what, there will always be some risk in that. So people need to understand that. But because we are using a community model, we have thought carefully about those risks and how to mitigate them. Probably more so than a company with a traditional development model has thought through them. From the start, we, open innovation companies in general, are held to a different standard. the end of the day, I think that ends up becoming a positive thing, not only for us, but for our clients. It wasn't an easy thing, but it was a positive thing. We feel like we have our clients' risks under control in a way that makes a lot of sense for them and other companies to do this. The benefits from hyper-specialization model like TopCoder can be very dramatic to a company's productivity. We've proven this across pretty much every major industry. If you're looking to use open innovation, you really have to look at mature models that can handle the risks that we talked about today. If you're not, and your organization's not ready, it's going to be very hard to get something meaningful off the ground.
So quickly, just to recap what we went over today. Really, I think you probably heard this. The mantra of today was really looking for a secure and mature open innovation platform. If it's not TopCoder, if you're doing something different than what TopCoder can provide for you, we do think that the questions that we've posed today and some of the answers and some of the way we've answered them are things you need to listen to and kind of have your ears kind of perked up and listening for those types of answers, because it does get complex and you need that mature platform to be able to really understand how much you can do through this. And when you start thinking in those ways, it becomes transformative. It's not a one-off solution. It's a transformation as how you approach work and innovation going forward, which is really a big thing. So the other one too is that the questions we went over today, they're probably going to come up, and probably a lot more are going to come up at some point in your journey down the open innovation path. We just suggest that you're proactive within your own four walls. It doesn't mean you act like your legal team, doesn't mean you act like a lawyer, but it does mean that you take steps like this to get educated on this, that you continually better yourself in understanding, so that when you're having discussions internally, you're really kind of coming from a position of an educated position of power rather than letting others handle the entire situation. You can really kind of shape and drive the conversation internally, which is really quite big when it comes to getting things off the ground and getting things moving. The last point, which we said a few times over too, is that really everything, when you're involving human beings in it, it does involve risk. This is, hiring for internal people to an outsourcing firm that might be located halfway across the globe, to crowdsourcing, or what you might call community development or development through a community. They all have risk. They all exist, and we've kind of been over that and kind of beat that one into the ground. But the real thing you have to think about, which Mike took a step back a few times, and to kind of put a little cap on that, is what happens if you don't go down the path of open innovation? What's going to happen to your organization, and what's the risk of not embracing these things and experimenting within open innovation? If you start weighing that risk-reward and seeing what others are accomplishing through platforms like TopCoder and other platforms that are out there to do different things, we believe that the scales start to tip, and then again, you can take that back internally and get the momentum you need to embrace whatever open innovation platform or open innovation approach or processes that you're looking to take on internally.